Okay. All set. So welcome everybody this morning on this snowy April day, something we'd rather see in the first part of December and not the end of April. With board director's permission, we're going to move the agenda around a little bit this morning. We're going to do our source protection meeting first, and then the hearing we have is going to be put down to the bottom of the agenda just for closed session. So board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded of the source protection and full authority board meeting, committee meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the Source Protection Authority or the full authority or the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority Board of Directors. The recorded video of the Source Protection Authority and the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the Source Protection Authority and the full authority meeting shall be consist solely of the minutes of the approved by the Source Protection Authority and the full authority. I'll now ask Elizabeth, I think first we need an election of officers for administrative approvals.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'll do a roll call first.
Yes.
Kravitz.
Here.
Jaguar.
Here.
Harvey.
Here.
Herbert.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
Peters. He's notified us that he'll be 15 minutes late. Pelosa.
Here.
Warwick.
Here.
Winfield.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have 9 members currently present.
Thank you. And I should ask if there's any declarations of your interest. Seeing none, the floor is yours, Elizabeth.
Mr. Chair, so typically for the Source Protection Authority, if I can have the next slide, Jessica. We basically pass a motion at the first meeting of the Source Protection Authority that we would adopt the administrative bylaws of the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority, and similarly that we would, that the chair and vice chair and all officers elected or appointed by the Conservation Authority in 2021 serve in the same roles for the Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority in 2021. This is the process that we used last year, and it was approved by our lawyer, our legal at the time. So at this time, I'd like first a motion that we adopt the administrative bylaw as updated October 21st, 2020.
Hey, any questions? I assume that's a mover by Harvey and Pelosi
Yes.
second. Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll ask Elizabeth to call the vote, please.
So on the motion, Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters is absent, Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair. So the next motion we would have is that that the chair and vice chair and all officers are elected or appointed by the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority in 2021 serve in the same roles for the Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority in 2021.
Moved by Mackey.
Seconded by Ralph.
Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, call vote, please.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. We'll move down to minutes of the meetings for the Lake Erie Regional Management Committee meeting of October 22nd and the Lake Erie Region Source Protection Committee meeting of January 21st and Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority meeting of November 18th. Any questions or concerns? We have a resolution before you. Have a mover and seconder, please.
Herbert
Warwick
moves.
move.
You got a Herbert and possibly Warwick. We'll go with Herbert and Warwick anyway. Any,
Sorry.
any further questions or concerns? We call the vote, please.
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. We have no correspondence today, so down to new business, the Kettle Creek Annual Progress Report. I assume, Elizabeth, you're going to lead us through this?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So on April 1st, the Lake Erie Source Protection Committee reviewed Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority's annual report. And this is the annual report on the progress of the implementation of Kettle Creek Source Protection Plan. The plan is progressing well and is on target. As you will remember, that we only had 2 threats within the Kettle Creek Source Protection area back in 2015 when the plan was first implemented. One of those threats no longer exists and the other was managed through a risk management plan. So this is basically housekeeping, really. The plan continues to be implemented as it should be. The Kettle Creek Source, or the Lake Erie Source Protection Committee was pleased with the progress and is presenting the annual report to you today to submit it to the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. And the recommendation was included in your advanced package and is on the screen.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any questions for Elizabeth on the report? Seeing no questions, I have a recommendation before you. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Harvey.
And seconder, please.
Mackey?
Any further discussion, questions? Seeing none, I call the vote, please. Elizabeth?
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. And I believe next on the agenda is just a next meeting, which is at the call of the chair. So we'll go into our full authority agenda at this time. Do I need to go through the spiel again, Elizabeth, or the first time is
I
enough?
think, yeah, we'll just note again that this full authority meeting is being recorded in accordance with what you see on your screen in front of you. I will conduct another quick roll call just to make sure that no other members have joined us. Krebitz,
Yes. Here.
Jiguer,
Here.
Harvey,
Here.
Herbert,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes,
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we now have all 10 members present.
Thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we're moving the hearing board down to the bottom of the list. So next is minutes from the March 17th meeting. Any errors or omissions?
Moved by Kravitz.
Seconder,
Winfield.
Bill. Call the vote, please. Elizabeth?
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jagger,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
yes,
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Move down to matters arising, reports. First report's media report from Betsy. Welcome, Betsy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just some items from the last month. We were communicating the trail work being done at the Dalewood Reservoir Trail. Some nice new bridges were installed along that trail. We advertised applications for the Kettle Creek Environmental Youth Corps, as well as the planting of 5 acres of tallgrass prairie that were planted in both Central Elgin and the City of London within the last couple of weeks. Next slide. We also had a few articles in local papers, one featuring Jeff talking about invasive species that are impacting our natural areas, as well as a feature from the Times Journal on the work on the Dalewood Reservoir Trail.
Mr. Chair, if you wish, I'll just, we'll continue on those matters arising A through D. So the next one was project tracking. Staff participated in the Thames Valley Science and Engineering Fair as award judges. We received $40,000 in funding from the Green Lane Community Trust to support the work under the Elgin Clean Water Program. It continues to be well received in the community. 32 projects were reviewed, with all but one being approved. So a total of $82,000 in grants to landowners through that program. As Betsy just mentioned, we did advertise for participants in the Kettle Creek Environmental Youth Corps. That program will run dependent on COVID-19 conditions locally. It will run as long as we're in orange, yellow, or green levels. We completed our seasonal camper allotments, and we received a total of 44 applications for 12 sites at Lake Whitaker and 33 applications for 30 sites at Dalewood. So also those sites well received. Seasonal staff interviews have been completed and offers of employment have gone out for conservation areas and tree planting crews. Next slide, Jess. Betsy was just going to highlight, I'll let her speak to the next 2 slides. Work has begun on the Bucky wetland creation project just outside of the office.
Yeah, so work began on the wetlands on April 6th. And due to elevations in the middle of the field, we actually have a 2-celled tiered wetland now. You can see the before picture on the left side, and then underneath is the completed cell. It's kind of hard to get a sense of the scale of that wetland in particular. It's a big size. And then you can see in the right side there, that work had just begun this week of the wetland that you'll see when you next come in the driveway at our office. And the next slide just shows Jess was able to come out with our drone and get an overhead shot of the work being completed on that wetland cell out in the field. And you can kind of see in the top middle is the workshop in the background, just to give you a bit of a vantage point of it. So we will be out again once the work's finished to get some finalized drone shots of the work. But I think it'll be a really nice feature for our office.
So, looks quite impressive.
And then I'll let Jen speak to the watershed conditions report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a pretty quiet March, which is nice. I did not order the snow, so no one can, just be, in case anyone asks, I did not order any snow. We're continuing with our shoreline conditions reports for the moment, just because of the high water levels in Lake Erie. However, water levels, as you can see in the graph on the below, is below 2019 levels, which is reassuring. And the big news is that the WECI projects at the Dalewood Dam have been completed with just a little bit of training for staff that we have to complete, but the work itself is done. Okay, any questions from any of Betsy, Elizabeth, or Jennifer? Sorry, my screen's not keeping up with the rest of everybody else's, it seems. So any questions for any of our reports? Seeing no, Ralph, do you have a question or you just?
No,
Oh,
no, I'm
okay.
just trying to move my screen.
All right. So we have a recommendation that matters arising A through D be received. Motion, please.
Peters,
Seconder,
Herbert will second.
call vote, please. Elizabeth?
Mr. Chair, I just mentioned before the motion, you're seeing on your screen now a synopsis of the insurance renewal, which was the last item, I believe, item D. And that was just noting that's okay. That was just noting an increase of 8,700 over 2020 levels. And this is seen as a success, although it is an increase. It's in comparison to some other organizations who are seeing large increases on top of reduced coverage. We were pleased with this, and we had budgeted for about a 15% increase. So I know that this can be accommodated within our existing budget. Unless there is any questions on that, I will call the vote.
Kravitz, I have a question. Just in regards to the insurance, do we only single source our insurance? Is it through Conservation Ontario, or do we get competitive quotes? Because a 17% increase is a large increase.
Yeah, we are a member of the Conservation Ontario Working Group for insurance. They go to competitive bids, and I believe the next competitive bid is coming up next year. So it is reviewed and works with a group of CAs that keep on top of the insurance and go out to competitive bid on a regular basis.
Any other questions?
Okay, can I address the chair, through the chair? Just on top of Janice's comment there about the insurance, 17% I know seems like a lot, but the market condition is absolutely nuts. And it's not surprising to see like 30–40% changes from the year before with no claims. So, you know, I know 17% looks like a lot, but I was quite relieved to see it was just 17%.
I think Southolds this year was closer to 25.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but COVID seems to be part of the issue anyway. So the recommendations again to matters arising A through D. Mover and seconder, I believe we already had. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Move down to item E, Conservation Ontario meeting. Elizabeth?
Mr. Chair, the chair and I did attend the virtual Conservation Ontario Council meeting on April 12th. It was their annual meeting and a new chair was elected, Andy Mitchell from Matonabee Conservation Authority. The Conservation Ontario annual report was attached and you can view that in your advanced packages. Just an update on the CA working group. As you recall, the minister did invite a number of CAs to participate in that working group to develop regulations surrounding the mandatory programs and services, the agreements and transition periods as a result of the changes to the CA Act. That group is meeting every 2 weeks, and I believe they've met about 5 times now. The first posting of the regulatory and governance proposals is expected shortly, and we'll keep you updated on progress there. Conservation Ontario and a number of the CAs are working to address concerns about governance, accountability, and transparency of CAs. And certainly there's a lot of items within the updated CA Act that pertain to those topics. Conservation Ontario is asking the CAs to commit to 3 main actions, basically to update their Conservation Authority administrative bylaws in accordance with best management practices as outlined in those Act changes, to proactively report on priorities and promote and demonstrate results. These actions were outlined in your advanced package. I don't think that there's anything included in those that we wouldn't voluntarily do on our own. CO is simply asking that all 36 CAs publicly commit to that so that we can show collectively our commitment to addressing and being showing good governance, accountability, and transparency. So they have asked all CAs to consider passing the motion that's on the next slide. Whereas the provincial government has passed legislative amendments related to the governance of CAs, and where CAs remain committed to fulfilling accountability and transparency, that Kettle Creek endorsed the 3 key actions developed by Conservation Ontario Steering Committee to update CA administrative bylaws, to report proactively on priorities, and to promote and demonstrate results, and that staff be directed to work with CO to implement these actions and to identify additional improvements in best management practices. And certainly staff would recommend your adoption of that motion today.
And I'd like to further add that it seems like the majority of CAs around the province are already at that level where they're meeting their targets on a regular basis, Kettle Creek included, obviously. And there's just a few that are still trying to catch up, but a lot of times it's just volumes and staffing issues that create a backlog for some of them. There's my understanding anyway. So I think on whole, most CAs are already up. It's just a matter of recognizing to the public that we are committed to do it. Any questions, concerns? Just the recommendations before you. Have a mover and seconder, please.
Yeah, Mackey moves to adopt.
Seconder, please.
Pelosa,
Lisa, any further discussion? See none, call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Giguere,
yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Move down to correspondence. We have several all recommending approval of the appointments that we do have in place at this point. Obviously, my township isn't there yet, but it will be shortly.
And I
Any
believe there, Mr. Chair, I believe Middlesex Center came in as well after the board package went out. So I think it's just Thames and Southwold that I'm waiting for.
Okay, any questions on that? So I have a recommendation the correspondence be received. Mover sector, please.
Jagger, I'll move.
I'll
Second.
second.
Winfield.
Winfield.
Further discussion? Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jagger,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Next item, statement of revenue expense. Kathleen, are you doing this one?
I don't know, Elizabeth, is there anything that we need to bring forth, or is it, it's pretty standard business as usual, Mr. Chair. So if there's any questions though, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions for Kathleen? Seeing no questions, we have a resolution before you. Mover and seconder, please.
Peters.
Kravitz,
Call the vote, please. Any further discussion? See none, call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
yes.
Jagger,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And the motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. We'll go down to new business. And of course, COVID-19 is always part of new business. Elizabeth,
Mr. Chair, staff just wanted to update the board members on the current level of programs and services relative to the most recent announcements of restrictions by the province. All staff remain working from home. Field staff are reporting to the campground and conducting field work related to essential programming. Tree planting will proceed in accordance with the attached safe operating procedures with limited staff. We have hired 4 seasonal hires to facilitate a skeleton planting crew. The hiking trails and day use facilities not associated with the campgrounds remain open for walk-through traffic. All outdoor amenities except for playgrounds are closed. Transient bookings are being automatically refunded from May 1st to May 20th and will continue until we're able to open for overnight camping. The campgrounds will open May 1st to seasonal campers, or at least that's what we are suggesting to the board members this morning. And if I can have the next slide. The regulation 8220 is clear that seasonal campgrounds that meet the following conditions can open even under the current stay-at-home orders. Campsites must be made available only for trailers and recreational vehicles that are used by individuals who are in need of housing or are permitted to be there by the terms of a full season contract. So we would, next slide, please. We would only be opening the campgrounds May 1st to those seasonals who have paid in full and who have booked an arrival appointment to allow for staggered and controlled entrance. So only those campers who have a seasonal contract who are paid in full will be allowed entrance into the park May 1st and will be staging the entrance into the park. They'll have to book an arrival appointment to do so. Occupants of the campsite should be from the same household until the stay-at-home order is lifted. There will be no day use or visitors. They must follow all the provincial and local public health guidelines, including gathering restrictions and limiting travel outside of their region. The campgrounds may not be used for self-isolation and quarantine, and this has been repeated many times and is included. The seasonal campers are aware of that. All amenities are closed, including washrooms and showers. And this is despite the regulations that says we could open washrooms and showers. We feel that it's safer for staff and the public to keep the washrooms and showers closed at this time. Therefore, all seasonals coming in will be required to have their own working washroom in their trailer. All rules and regulations, excuse me, will be strictly enforced with our zero tolerance policy. Masks must be worn for all face-to-face interactions with staff. Appointments and consultations will be by phone or email until that stay-at-home order is lifted, and no construction and site improvements until further notice. Next slide. We've also posted the following sticker at all our service windows. The gatehouse will remain closed to the public. All people entering the campground must self-screen using the Ontario government's COVID-19 self-assessment. And by signing the permit, the seasonal campers will agree that they will self-screen and pass the Ontario self-screening test each and every time they enter the campground, and agree to follow all the updated rules and procedures.
Okay. Questions for Elizabeth on the report? I think it went fairly smoothly last year. Wasn't any real big complications, was there, Elizabeth?
No, I think especially with seasonal campers, once they are on their site, basically, especially under the stay-at-home orders, really they have access to their site, and that's about it within the campground other to walk through it.
So question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. So just a clarification on my mind, it says on that very last slide, all occupants will self-screen each and every time you enter the campground. So if they went out to get groceries and then came back, they have to test again just to get groceries? Is that the way I'm reading that?
It's a self-screen, so they have to basically go through that self-screening process themselves and make sure that they don't have any symptoms or that they haven't done anything that's not in keeping with that self-screening process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We have a recommendation that the COVID-19 programs and services 2021 report and the tree planting safe work procedure be approved. Move a seconder, please.
Moved by Warwick.
Seconder, please.
Herbert will second.
Okay, I think I heard Herbert.
Yes.
Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item, Lake Whitaker Conservation Area Forest Management. I think Jeff is doing this report.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you is a staff report just to provide members an update on the results of the marking and the bidding process of the forested areas at Lake Whitaker Conservation Area. To summarize that report, GWG Resources Services did attend the property, assess the property multiple times in December and January, put together a marking prescription and a marking inventory. And subsequent to that, they did conduct tendering process in February of the trees that marked. They did mark approximately 500 trees for harvest that had potential saw log value. And they did mark approximately another 140 trees that should be cut for the purposes of fuel wood. The purposes of their marking really were to improve the overall health of the woodlot and the vigor of the remaining trees. So that basically came down to this was a long overdue and needed marking. To summarize, they did circulate the trees they marked to 17 different logging contractors, 9 of which submitted bids. You can see from the report the bids ranged that came in from $34,000 to just over $81,000. So it really demonstrates that the need to circulate to get multiple bids. So based on that, we are recommending that we accept the bid from Townsend Lumber for $81,750 to harvest the deciduous stands at Lake Whitaker, according to the tree marking done by GWG Resources Services. And just because of the nature of the area out at Lake Whitaker and the length of time that'll be needed to remove that number of logs, we are recommending that we also retain GWG Services, Resource Services, to help monitor the harvest operation when it's underway. Now, the intent of the harvest operation, the contract would be for the logging contractor to go in after the end of this camping season, so late fall and into the winter months. So be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Any questions or concerns?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
thank you. Through you, just a comment. I have no problem with awarding the contract to Townsend Lumber. I would emphasize and definitely support oversight throughout the entire operation. So that would be very important.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Do we ever, just to Lawrence maybe, I know that in that area, there's about 3 different Amish sawmills operating. Do we ever have the Amish ever approach us about taking any lumber out or not?
That I do believe that a couple of the neighboring Amish families or lumber mills have approached Mike and or conservation area supervisors in the past, and there's been some limited removal, I believe, along property lines in the past, but nothing comprehensive has ever been brought forward to my attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I know they're not likely to pay $81,000 for lumber, but I mean, if we, you know, they are local and can work through any condition, so that's why I asked.
Yep. I know, if I may add, I know that there was a couple of the Amish Mennonite logging contractors that were included in that 17. So I don't know if what their proximity was to Lake Whitaker. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? See no other questions. So we have a recommendation before you to accept the bid from Townsend Lumber. A mover and seconder, please.
Also move, Ralph.
Giguere, I'll second.
Derek seconds. Any further discussion? Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz? Kravitz?
Oh, yes.
Giguere?
Yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Herbert?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Peters?
Yes.
Pelosa?
Yes.
Warwick?
Yes.
Winfield?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Move down to our next report on the April planning and regulations activity. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your advanced packages was the summary report on planning support letters issued by staff, as well as Section 28 permits that have been issued at the staff level since the last meeting. We're just looking for receipt of this information. I'm happy to answer any questions if the members have any.
Any questions for Joe? Seeing no questions, we have a recommendation to receive Joe's report. Can we mover and seconder, please?
Pelosa,
Seconder,
Mackey,
any further discussion? Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes. Yes.
Jiguer,
yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. So we have a recommendation that the board of directors sit as a hearing board in respect to an application under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act. That would move in a seconder, please.
Kravitz,
Seconder, please.
Warwick, second. Warwick?
Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. This is a hearing under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act in respect to an application by David Lee Tracy for permission to relocate an existing cottage at 5369 Grand Canyon Road in the Township of Southold. The province of Ontario has made regulations under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act, which requires the permission of the authority for development within an area regulated by the authority in order to ensure no adverse effect on the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or pollution, or conservation of land, or to permit alteration to a shoreline or watercourse, or interference with a wetland. The staff have reviewed this proposed work, and a copy of the staff report has been given to the applicant. According to section 2.2 of the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority's section 28 hearing procedural guidelines, the right to a hearing is required when application as deemed by the regulation of approval or officer warrants a review by the authority for technical or policy or for information purposes. In holding this hearing, the authority board is to determine whether or not a permit is to be issued. In doing so, we can only consider the application in the form that it is before us. The staff reports such evidence that may be given and submissions to be made on behalf of the applicant. The proceedings will be conducted according to the Statutory Powers Procedure Act. Under section 5 of the Canada Evidence Act, the witness may refuse to answer any question on the grounds that the answer may tend to incriminate the person or may tend to establish his or her liability to civil proceedings at the instance of the Crown or any other person. Procedure in general shall be informal without evidence before it being given under oath or affirmation. As the hearing proceeds, the procedures listed in the hearing procedure summary provided may be laxed or abbreviated for efficiencies. The authority may ask questions of the witness for clarification at any time. If the applicant has any questions to ask of the hearing board or the authority representative, they must be directed to the chair or the chair of the board. I'll now ask Joe Gordon to present his report. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I guess, sorry, we have a roll call to do first.
Mr. Chair, when we moved into the hearing, if the board members are okay, I will suffice that as the roll call as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of interest for the members, as we now entered the hearing session, The applicant, Mr. David Tracy, as well as KCCA solicitor Grant Inglis, has been admitted into the Zoom. So the applicant is available for any questions that the board may have, if they have any. And Mr. Inglis is on and he'll participate in any closed session matters in staff's absence. If I could have the next slide, please. So what we have before us today is an application at 5369 Grand Canyon Road, which ultimately relates in a relocation of an existing cottage structure further away from the shoreline bluff that's existing. As you'll note in the advanced staff report, staff is supportive of the application, but there's a couple technical matters beyond staff's ability to issue a permit in the reason why it's being brought before the hearing board today. So this is a 2015 aerial. It's a little difficult to see because of the tree cover, but the arrow of the address is pointing at about the location of the existing cottage today. All of these lands on your screen are located within the 100-year predicted erosion hazard limit. Because of the severe average annual recession rates, that erosion hazard limit is further north, completely north of this property. Next slide, please. This is just a more recent photo of the 2018 off of Google Earth. Again, a little difficult to see the cottage due to the tree cover, but it does show that the advancement of the bluff erosion and the proximity of the existing cottage towards the bluff in a more recent photo. And if you can just click again on the slide, please. I believe based on measurements off the 2018, we're sitting at about 14 meters. This slide here shows photographs that were taken in December 2018 that show that the existing cottage was roughly 20 meters from the top of the shoreline bluff, and some examples of some slope failures that were occurring in 2018. If I could have next slide, please.
Just a quick observation.
Go ahead.
If I may. I noticed where there are trees, the erosion doesn't go as close to the trees as it does into the open spaces. So the trees were obviously a help to keep the dirt from falling into the lake. It's just something I quickly noticed. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jim. Trees certainly do help with stabilizing the slope. Unfortunately, they can also contribute to large slope failures along the bluff. Once the slope conditions beneath those tree roots, those massive tree roots, gets undermined or gets too close to the tree, then you could have the tree top over the bluff and take a large amount of soil with it. So it depending on the circumstances, it can be good. And sometimes when the bluff erosion reaches those trees, some management's required to help reduce large failures. But thank you for that comment.
Yeah, thank you.
These photos at this point were taken last week, so they're more active. As you can see, there's approximately 14 meters to the existing cottage today. You can see some recent failure that's occurred. Based on site observations, it appears primarily to be top of slope erosion. A little difficult to see in the photo, but the top of the slope is at a 90-degree incline, if not inverted, which does create some stability issues at the top of bank. But based on the 2018 to 2021 photo, approximately 6 meters of that tableland has been lost. One thing we do recognize based on our shoreline management studies, that based on the historical erosion and slope failures that occur along this shoreline, they suggest that anything within 10 meters of the top of bluff is at imminent risk and could be lost in the next slope failure. So certainly we're getting to a point where the landowner is taking a proactive measures to get in and relocate the structure before it comes at risk or before it's unsafe to do so. If I could have the next slide, please. So here is showing, as part of the application submission, there was a survey provided showing the existing location of the cottage and pinned where the new location will be. Point of interest is the applicant's not proposing to increase the size of the footprint. This solely is picking up the existing cottage and simply moving it forward to a new foundation and reconnecting utility services. Next slide, please. This slide shows an example of the site plan sketch that was prepared by the applicant to the left of the screen, with a representation of that proposal shown on the aerial photography on the right-hand side that's been prepared by staff. One point of interest when looking at the map on the right, the existing cottage is currently located within a stable slope allowance, which is considered a more more increased risk because it's dealing with just the slope factors and doesn't necessarily include the erosion impacts of the Lake Erie shoreline at the toe. All other existing structures, such as the septic tank and the septic field, are located north of the stable slope, and the proposed new location of the cottage is again proposed north of the stable slope allowance. If I could have the next slide, please. In 2019, the board did approve using the technical guide for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River system that provides an appendix for consideration of existing development within the hazard lands. So this was adopted by the board to allow staff to issue permits at the staff level if it's considered compliance with these guidelines. This is what we're comparing the application to. Unfortunately, as part of our review, there was one technical matter that staff felt this should come to the hearing board. So what I've done is I just applied the applicable construction activities with regard to the associated hazards. As you can see, for relocation of a dwelling further away from the shoreline, it's supported. It's on the option of the landowner where they put it. In this scenario, as I indicated before, the structure and all of its utilities will be located outside of the stable slope allowance. One consistent recommendation you'll see in the guidelines, due to the increased risks of structures located within the stable slope allowance, nothing's permitted new to occur in that area. But as part of this proposal, he's relocating everything out of the stable slope allowance. With regard to the septic system, what they do recommend is that septic systems be located landward of the dwelling structure. So it is ideal that the dwelling structure should be the closest structure to the point of the hazard, and that the septic tank should be landward of that structure. That is the one deficiency we've seen in the current application, is that by relocating the existing cottage further north, the location of the septic tank, although outside of the stable slope allowance, will remain south of the new location of the existing structure. The existing field bed will continue to be in compliance with the guidelines, being that it's north of the new location of the cottage and outside of the stable slope allowance. One other factor we considered in this is looking at major structures, where they recommend where there's no protection works that the building shall be readily movable by design with no permanent foundation, and that the temporary foundation to be removed when the structure is relocated in the future. A relocation plan to be submitted and submitted in a setback greater than 30 times the annual average recession rate, or not less than 15 meters from the stable slope. With the proposal within the application, the cottage will have steel beams installed beneath the cottage and ultimately placed on helicable piers on its new location. So certainly it's ideal in terms of its design to be readily movable again in the future when and if the erosion presents itself to the new location. We have a relocation plan submitted, and the setback will be 16 meters beyond the existing stable slope allowance approximately. So if I could have the next slide, please. So in staff's review of the proposal, there was the one discrepancy with the septic system. As outlined in the considerations of the staff report, in consideration of prior applications, we have been able to negotiate covenant restrictions on title regarding an unauthorized septic system on an alternate property. So considering prior decisions of the hearing board, we've had a covenant restriction which allowed the authority to have the powers or authorities to order relocation of the septic system before it came at risk to erosion. This was a result of a violation process, but it was considered of the board on a subsequent application who looked at maintaining a cottage dwelling unit in an accessory structure. Subsequent to that discussion, I've had discussions with the Ontario building official with the Township of Southold, who did confirm that those powers do lie with the building official under the Ontario Building Code. So any consideration of a covenant restriction possibly could be considered redundant, as those powers already exist with the building code. And under the building code, applicable law must be met. So if at any time the municipality issued orders on septic tanks, any remediation or new construction would have to have a Kettle Creek permit before it could be issued. So again, staff are supportive of the relocation of the existing structure. It's meeting the minimum requirements under the provincial guide to have it located outside of the stable slope allowance, further away from the hazards, although it still will remain within the 100-year predicted erosion hazard limit. And again, we're seeking guidance and direction from the board on how to handle the discrepancy with the location of the existing septic tank. The options that staff have presented for the board is you could either consider granting permission for the relocation based on the submissions of the application, which would mean they would be using the existing septic tank at its current location, or the board could consider granting permission with conditions. And the conditions that we've offered the board for consideration is the board could consider that requiring the existing septic tank to be located to an area landward north of the most southern extent of the proposed location of the primary structure so that we have full compliance with the guidelines. Or you could consider, based on prior decisions of the board, of considering a covenant restriction be registered on title, recognizing the associated hazards and providing the authority to the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority to order removal or relocation of the septic tank once deemed to be at risk to erosion. Next slide, please. That ends my presentation. As mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. The applicant, Mr. David Tracy, is also present if you have any questions for the applicant. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Joe. Mr. Tracy, do you have anything further to add, or comment, or question the board on?
No, just you guys have been very, very thorough, and I appreciate it. He's pretty much covered everything.
Hey, any questions from board members?
Chair, Allison?
Go ahead.
Okay, just, I would just, through the chair, just like to ask Joe again about the redundancy of the covenant. If the chief building official has the power to, say this is the time that we need to move that septic tank, is it worth incurring the extra expenses of legal to go ahead and put a covenant in if that job is already being done by the municipality?
Thank you, Allison. And I guess to clarify on my point of redundancy, I know historically the authority negotiated covenant restriction on a prior septic system along the shoreline as a result of a violation process. What we've realized now in discussions with the Ontario Building Code is that if the septic tank when and if the septic tank becomes at risk in the future, they have the power under the OBC to order correction. So, which would ultimately, in this case, require relocation. And Kettle Creek would be involved in that through our regulations as a result of the applicable law under the building code. So by putting the covenant restriction on title, it would be reassuring existing legislation that already exists and the powers that already exist. So the same effect could be achieved without the covenant restriction. If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Sorry, is Allison, sorry, were you finished?
I was just going to say the prior covenant was to a violation, like a case where there was a violation. This is not a violation. This is somebody that's willing to move their cottage and just wanted to do it in stages by the sounds of it. Am I correct?
That is correct, and I do apologize. One point in my presentation that I neglected is in the advanced staff report. You'll also see the response from the landowner. So through our pre-consultation, we did ask the landowner to explore moving the septic tank at this time, as it's inevitable that it may have to be moved again in the future at some point. And his response, which was included with the report, if I could generalize it, was concerns with regard to costs associated with that at this time due to certain COVID impacts. As well as the potential for damage or loss of trees. So his current position was that he understands and acknowledges that at some point that septic tank will have to be moved again to order to maintain habitable of the cottage. But his wishes is that due to costs and those other reasons that he move it at the time it needs to be and not in advance as part of this project.
Yes, I did actually read the supplemental reading to that report. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dominique.
Thank you. Could I just ask for clarification of the actual distance currently of the septic tank to the shoreline?
Thank you, Dominique. I'm just trying to think. I don't know if I have the exact distance from the shoreline. We know that the existing septic tank as part of the application in 2018 is 18 meters north of the existing cottage. Okay, so I guess off quick numbers, we know today the cottage is about 14 meters from the top of bluff. I would estimate the existing cottage, without seeing the drawing in front of me, maybe about another 10 or 12 meters plus the 18. So we'd be looking at 26, 43 meters.
Okay.
As a quick calculation and estimate based on current.
Yeah.
Off the
Yeah, I
cuff.
understand. I was trying to do the same math just to get an idea of exactly where it is relative to the erosion right now. So, yeah.
So if I may, Dominique, onto that, the stable slope allowance is based on a 3 horizontal to 1 vertical. So it's actually measured from the toe. So that stable slope allowance from the toe of the slope at minimum is 120 meters from the water's edge. So the septic tank would be just slightly beyond that, measured from the toe, not the top.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Jim Herbert.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you very much. Well, from what I know about septics, I lived on a septic for 20 years. In fact, when we built our house out in Elgin County, that there was major requirements to have it. It had to have nine runs at 45 feet long. It had to be so deep, and the new septics now are I think they're dual tanks. Some are even triple tanks, and for the applicant having to remove that septic tank, if and when he does have to do that, it's going to be a major concern, because I know, Grant, you would know in Southfield, I'm sure there's anytime you touch a septic tank, you're now open the door to have it all done proper. So I'm happy for him. And this is not like there's 100 people using this septic. I'm happy to support just to let him move the cottage and put it to the existing septic tank. To me, that makes the most common sense situation for me. But when you start digging out where he is, you're going to be killing tree roots, and you're going to be destroying the area, and it can become a nightmare. So I'm happy to support just moving the cottage and use the existing septic tank. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that septic tank and field bed's only 3 years old roughly, so moving it might be a challenge, but I think it's probably doable, and since it's just 3 years old, it'd probably be quite acceptable for any future removal, but that's up to the building inspector too, so. For his,
with only being 3 years old, I'm sure it meets all the requirements.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one
members-
quick question.
Go-
Is
go
this
ahead,
just
Ralph.
a summer residence? Or is this a permanent residence?
Permanent.
If I may, can I
permanent.
refer that to Mr. Tracy to answer, please?
Sure.
It is absolutely my full-time residence now, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Kravitz here. Just looking.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Thank you. I'm looking at the aerial photo. The septic tank, the existing septic tank is basically in line with the existing buildings, the neighboring properties. So I do not have a problem supporting them. And I'm glad that Mr. Tracy is being proactive in moving his cottage at this time. So I would fully support this. Thank you.
So I guess I'm going to ask, are the board members at a comfort level of making a decision now, or does anybody want to go into closed session to discuss further with our solicitor at this time? I don't see anybody wishing to go into closed session. Nope, no takers. So if there's no takers to go into closed session, we'll deal with the recommendation before us. So I'm kind of getting the impression that we're looking at the first recommendation, which is to leave the septic as is for now and just move the cottage.
If I may, Mr. Chair, the recommendation that before you is exactly that. It's giving authorization to staff to issue the permit based on the application and its attachments without conditions.
Any further discussion or concerns?
Peters would move.
Seconder,
Mackey,
Mackey seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote, please, Elizabeth. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Krebitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so in the matter of the Conservation Authorities Act, RSO 1990, Chapter 27, and in the matter of the application by David B. Tracy for H21-001, in respect to the following property, 5369 Grand Canyon Road, Township of Southold, for the permission of the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority pursuant to regulations made under Section 28, subsection 12 of this act, at the hearing held before the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority on April 21st, 2021, the application was granted. Moved by Peters, second by, who's the seconder?
Mackey.
Mackey. On the 21st day of March, or April, sorry, 2021. It's been moved and seconded and carried. We have a recommendation to come out, or motion come out of the hearing, Elizabeth, or it's just ends at this point?
Sorry, can we go to the next slide? I believe it ends at that point, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, if there's nothing else, our next full authority is May 19th, 10 o'clock. Anything else to add before we adjourn? Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved, Herbert.
Herbert, seconder.
Loza,
Loza. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Mr. Chair, I'll assume that everyone's in favor of that motion.
I believe so. Okay, have a great day, people.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks there, Mr.
you.
Tracy. If you're still on, good luck to you.
bye.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.